Have you ever felt the weight of silence? The kind that presses down on your soul, demanding you to speak, yet you hold back? There are moments in life when silence is a shield. It protects you. It gives you power. But there are also moments when silence is a prison, one that traps you in regret, in weakness, in a life half-lived. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast abyss. Below you, countless men have fallen, not from battle, not from failure, but from a simple act of hesitation. They knew they should have spoken, but they did not. And in that silence, their fate was sealed. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." But how can a man be good if he watches injustice in silence? If he buries his truth? If he lets fear steal his voice? The ancient Stoics believed in measured words, in the discipline of speech. But they also knew there are times when silence is a betrayal, not just to others, but to yourself. Today, we uncover 5 moments in life where silence is not wisdom, but weakness. 5 moments where your voice is the only thing that stands between you and a life of power, honor, and truth. Listen carefully, because these moments will come. And when they do, you must not be silent. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Every like, subscribe helps us continue our mission of sharing knowledge. And leave a comment below and share your opinion on these situations. Ready to unlock more wisdom? Let's get started. Situation 1. When injustice demands your silence. There is a moment every man will face in his lifetime. A moment where the air around him turns heavy, where the weight of what is happening presses against his chest like a stone. His mind screams, "Say something, do something," yet he remains silent. Perhaps it is fear, perhaps it is doubt, or perhaps he believes falsely that silence is the wiser choice. But there are moments in life when silence is nothing more than submission to evil, a quiet nod to wrongdoing, a passive acceptance of something that should never be accepted. Imagine standing in a room where a lie is spoken so convincingly that even the truth begins to waver. A man is accused of something he did not do. You know the truth. You were there. You saw what really happened. But the room is full of people who want to believe the lie because it suits them, because it is easier, because it serves their interests. And you hesitate. You tell yourself that speaking up will make enemies, that it will bring trouble, that the truth is not your burden to carry. At that moment, your silence is not neutrality. It is not wisdom. It is participation. Seneca once said, "He who does not prevent a crime when he can encourages it." The world is filled with men who believe they are good simply because they do not commit evil. But what of the man who allows evil to exist when he has the power to stop it? Is he not just as guilty? History remembers the great tyrants, the men who burned cities, who enslaved nations, who ruled with cruelty and arrogance. But history also remembers those who let it happen, the men who stood in silence while injustice unfolded before their eyes, the men who turned away, convincing themselves that it was not their place to intervene. A man who refuses to speak against injustice is like a soldier who flees the battlefield, not because he is weak, but because he believes someone else will fight in his place. But what if no one does? What if every man in the room is waiting for someone else to step forward? Then the lie becomes truth. The innocent suffer, and the wrong prevails. Cato the Younger, the great Stoic statesman, lived in a time of corruption, when Rome was rotting from within. He knew that speaking against powerful men would cost him everything. And yet, he did. Again and again he stood before the Senate, his voice steady, his words cutting through the lies like a blade. He did not win every battle. In the end, he lost his life for his defiance. But his name lived on, not as a man who survived, but as a man who never surrendered to silence. The world today is no different. Injustice does not always come in grand, visible forms. It is not always a tyrant on a throne. Sometimes it is the small, quiet betrayals we witness every day. A friend who is wrongly blamed, a stranger humiliated for no reason, a workplace where the corrupt rise while the honest are pushed down. And in each of these moments, a man has a choice, to speak or to be silent. The excuse is always the same: it's not my problem. But how many injustices have been allowed to grow because of this thought? How many times has evil flourished because good men decided it was not their fight? A single voice can be ignored, but many voices cannot. and it only takes one man to break the silence for others to follow. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision that something else is more important than fear. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher, ruled with this belief. He could have been silent, avoiding the burden of justice. He could have ignored the suffering of the people, as so many rulers before him had done. But he chose to be different. He wrote in his meditations, "Do what is right, not what is easy." This is the test of a man. Not in grand gestures, not in battles fought with swords, but in everyday moments where his voice is needed. To stand for the truth when lies are easier. To defend the weak when it would be safer to look away. To be the one who speaks when silence would be more comfortable. The cost of speaking up is often high. It may cost friendships, security, or even reputation. But the cost of silence is always greater. It is the slow erosion of character, the quiet regret that lingers long after the moment has passed, the knowledge that a man had a chance to stand and he did not. There will come a day when you find yourself in such a moment, when you witness something that demands your voice, when every instinct tells you to stay quiet, to let it pass, to pretend you did not see. And in that moment, remember this: silence is never just silence. It is a choice, a statement, a verdict. And sometimes, it is the loudest betrayal of all. Situation 2. When your boundaries are being violated. There comes a time in every man's life when he is tested, not by war, not by catastrophe, but by the slow erosion of his dignity. It does not happen in an instant. It is not a single blow that shatters him. It is something more insidious, more patient. It is the quiet, persistent violation of his boundaries. And if he does not speak, if he does not resist, he will find himself hollowed out, a shadow of the man he once was. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define who you are, what you stand for, and what you will not tolerate. They are not just physical, but emotional, psychological, and even spiritual. A man without boundaries is like a city without walls, open to invasion, vulnerable to corruption, destined to be conquered by those who see his silence as permission. And yet, how many men allow their boundaries to be crossed? How many men bite their tongue when they should speak? A friend disrespects them, and they laugh it off. A colleague takes credit for their work, and they say nothing. A partner manipulates them, and they excuse it, not because they do not feel the violation, but because they believe that speaking up will cost them something. Seneca once wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." The man who endures the slow decay of his self-respect, thinking he is avoiding conflict, is in fact inviting something far worse, a life where he is no longer in control of himself. The world does not respect the man who allows himself to be walked over. The world does not admire the man who swallows his truth to keep the peace. It is an uncomfortable truth, but a truth nonetheless. People treat you the way you allow them to treat you. And every time you stay silent in the face of disrespect, every time you let someone step over the line without consequence, you are teaching them that it is acceptable. It begins small, a joke at your expense, a favor that was never repaid, a demand that was never reasonable. And you ignore it, telling yourself it is not worth the fight. But disrespect is like a weed. Leave it unchecked and it spreads. Before you realize it, your kindness is being mistaken for weakness, your patience for submission, your silence for approval. The Stoics believed in self-mastery. They believed a man should be disciplined, composed, and in control of his emotions. But control does not mean silence. It does not mean submission. It means knowing when to stand your ground, when to say, "No, this is not acceptable," and when to make it clear that you are not a man to be disrespected. Cato the Younger, the great Stoic senator, lived in a time when Rome was crumbling under the weight of corruption and greed. Many men saw what was happening and stayed silent, afraid to challenge the powerful. But Cato, he spoke. He resisted. He did not allow the boundaries of his integrity to be crossed, even when it meant standing alone. And though he lost his life for it, his name lived on, unbroken, untainted. A man must know where his lines are drawn, and he must enforce them. Not with rage, not with violence, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty that he will not betray himself. There is no honor in suffering disrespect in silence. There is no virtue in allowing yourself to be used. If a man does not defend his dignity, no one else will do it for him. There will come a moment Perhaps it has already come, when someone will test your boundaries. They will push to see how far they can go. They will see if you are a man who stands firm or a man who bends under pressure. And in that moment, you will have a choice. You can stay silent, pretend it does not matter, tell yourself that peace is worth the price of your pride. Or you can speak. You can set the boundary. You can make it clear that you are not a man to be disrespected. Because a man who does not defend himself will one day wake up and realize he no longer knows who he is. Situation 3. When your dreams and ambitions are being crushed. There is a slow kind of death that many men experience, not of the body, but of the soul. It does not come suddenly, with a dramatic end. It happens over years, in the quiet moments of surrender, in the small compromises, in the whispered voice that says, maybe I'm asking for too much. It is the death of ambition, the quiet burial of a man's dreams beneath the weight of doubt, ridicule, and fear. Every great man in history has faced this moment. The moment when the world tells him, you cannot do this. When those around him, sometimes even those closest to him, laugh at his vision, undermine his confidence, and tell him to settle for less. This is the moment when most men fall, not because they lack ability, but because they remain silent, because they do not fight for their own future. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." And yet, how many men have never truly lived because they allowed someone else's doubts to define their limits? How many men have buried their dreams simply because another person told them they were foolish for having them? The world is full of men who once had fire in their eyes, who once felt the hunger to achieve something great. But over time, that fire was smothered by criticism, by obligation, by the slow, grinding pressure of society, telling them to be realistic. And so, they stayed silent. They did not defend their vision. They let their dreams wither away, until one day they woke up and realized they were not living their own life, but the life that others had imposed on them. A man's ambition is sacred. It is the force that pulls him forward, that pushes him to rise above the ordinary, that makes him more than just another name in the crowd. And yet, ambition is fragile if it is not defended. Picture this. A young man has a dream. Perhaps he wants to start a business. Perhaps he wants to master a craft. Perhaps he wants to carve his own path instead of following the one set for him. And then come the voices. That's too risky. You don't have what it takes. What if you fail? They come from all directions: family, friends, teachers, society. And if he is not careful, he starts to believe them. He stays silent. He does not argue. He does not fight for his vision. And slowly, the dream dies. Seneca once said, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult." The man who lets others dictate what is possible for him will always live in the shadow of their limitations. The truth is, most people do not try to kill your dreams because they hate you. They do it because they do not understand what it means to dream so boldly. Because they have already given up on their own ambitions, and they cannot bear to see someone else refuse to do the same. A man must know when to be silent and when to speak. But when it comes to his own purpose, his own goals, his own future, silence is not an option. If he does not fight for his dream, no one else will. If he does not defend his vision, the world will bury it. Look at history. Every great man, every philosopher, every warrior, every leader has faced opposition. The ones who changed the world were not the ones who had easy paths. They were the ones who refused to let others silence them. Think of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. He could have lived an easy life, letting others rule in his place. But he took the weight of an empire onto his shoulders, writing in his meditations about duty, about purpose, about the necessity of perseverance. Think of Epictetus, born a slave, with every reason to believe that he would never rise above his station. And yet, he refused to let the world dictate his fate. He studied, he learned, he became one of the greatest philosophers of his time. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. The lesson is clear. No one will fight for your dreams if you do not. No one will believe in you if you do not believe in yourself first. And the moment you stay silent, the moment you stop defending your ambition, is the moment you let others write the story of your life for you. There will come a day if it has not come already, when someone will challenge your vision, when someone will tell you that you are reaching too high, that you are asking for too much, that you should settle for less. In that moment, you will have a choice. You can stay silent. You can nod your head and pretend they are right. You can let their doubts become your reality. Or you can speak. You can make it clear that you will not be reduced by their fears, that you will not abandon your ambition because it makes others uncomfortable, that you will not silence yourself simply because the world does not understand your vision. Because a man who does not fight for his own future will one day wake up and realize he has no future at all. Situation 4. When someone tries to control you. There is a force in this world that seeks to shape men into something small, something obedient, something that does not resist. It comes in many forms: a controlling relationship, an overbearing authority, a manipulative friend, a society that tells you exactly how you must think, speak, and live. And most men, without realizing it, submit to this force, not because they are weak, but because control is often disguised as concern, as love, as guidance. And so they stay silent. They do not fight back. They do not resist. Until one day, they wake up and realize they are not living their own life at all. Control is never taken all at once. No chains are thrown on you in a single moment. It happens slowly, piece by piece, demand by demand. Someone tells you what is best for you, and at first it seems harmless. They make a small decision for you, then another, and another. And if you do not push back, if you do not speak up, soon you find yourself molded into something you never agreed to become. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And yet, how many men give away their freedom without even realizing it? How many allow someone else to dictate what they can do, what they can say, even what they can think? A man who does not speak when his freedom is being taken is a man who is already enslaved. Not by chains, but by silence, by his own unwillingness to resist. This control can come from anywhere. A partner who tells you who you can and cannot be. A family that expects you to live a life that is not your own. A boss who forces you to sacrifice your dignity for a paycheck. A society that demands obedience, that punishes any man who dares to question, who dares to think for himself. Look at history. The greatest oppressions did not begin with violence. They began with silence, with men agreeing, little by little, to give up their autonomy in exchange for comfort, for approval, for the illusion of peace. But peace without freedom is nothing more than a prison without walls. Cato the Younger, the Stoic statesman, lived in a time when Rome was falling under the grip of tyranny. The Republic was crumbling, and powerful men sought to silence anyone who resisted. Cato could have remained quiet, he could have submitted, but he refused. He spoke out. He stood firm. And though it cost him his life, he died unbroken, his spirit untamed. And this is the question every man must ask himself. What part of myself am I allowing others to control? Are you in a relationship where you are no longer allowed to be who you truly are? Do you feel the need to constantly explain, to justify, to prove yourself, because the person beside you does not trust you to be your own man? That is not love. That is control. Are you working a job where you must betray your own values just to keep the peace? Do you remain silent while corruption grows around you, because speaking up would make you a target? That is not security. That is submission. Do you feel the weight of expectations forcing you into a life that you never chose? Do you stay silent in family gatherings, in social circles, because you fear that if you speak your truth, you will no longer be accepted? That is not belonging. That is imprisonment. A man must know when to be silent and when to raise his voice. When someone tries to control him, when someone tries to take away his ability to choose, that is the moment he must speak. That is the moment he must fight. Because the world will never hand you your freedom. You must take it. The cost of resistance is high. It may cost you relationships. It may cost you comfort. It may cost you everything you thought was safe. But the cost of submission is higher. It is the slow decay of your own will, the erosion of your own soul, the quiet realization one day that you are no longer living as a man, but as a puppet. Epictetus, who was born into slavery, knew this better than anyone. He lived in chains, but he refused to let his mind be enslaved. He wrote, "No man is free who is not his own master." Freedom is not just about laws. about governments. It is about the ability to think for yourself, to choose your own path, to refuse to be controlled by anyone who does not have your best interests at heart. The world will always try to mold you. People will always try to shape you into something that benefits them. But a man who knows his worth, a man who understands the power of his own voice, will not allow it. And so the moment will come, perhaps it has already come, when you feel the pull of control tightening around you, when you feel the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against your chest, suffocating the fire inside you. You will have a choice. You can stay silent, you can obey, you can surrender to the will of others and tell yourself it is easier this way. Or you can speak. You can set yourself free, not by asking permission, but by deciding, firmly, unshakably, that no one will dictate your life but you. Because a man who does not own his voice will soon find that he does not own his life at all. Situation 5. When the truth is being buried. There is a war that has existed since the beginning of time. It is not fought with swords or armies. It is not waged in battlefields or in the streets. It is fought in silence, in whispers, in the dark spaces where men are afraid to speak. It is the war between truth and deception. And in this war, most men do not lose because they are defeated. They lose because they never fight at all. It is one of the greatest tests a man will ever face. The moment when he knows the truth but is pressured to stay silent. Perhaps because speaking up will make him an enemy. Perhaps because it will make him unpopular. Perhaps because it will cost him something, his job, his comfort, his peace. And so he hesitates, he bites his tongue. He tells himself it is not worth it. But here is the brutal reality. Every time a man remains silent when he knows the truth must be spoken, he becomes part of the lie. He becomes a willing participant in deception. And the longer he stays quiet, the easier it becomes to accept the lie, to live with it, to let it spread until it is no longer just a lie. It is the new reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." The truth is rarely popular. It rarely wins the approval of the crowd. But a man who values his integrity, a man who understands that his words have weight, does not remain silent just because the world wishes him to. Think of history. Every society that fell into corruption, every civilization that collapsed under its own weight had one thing in common: good men who knew the truth but did not speak. Rome, once the mightiest empire on earth, did not fall in a single day. It decayed slowly from within as powerful men spread lies and the people accepted them. Those who saw the truth and had the courage to speak it were silenced, exiled, destroyed. And the rest, they watched, they stayed quiet, until it was too late. A man must ask himself, am I willing to pay the price for speaking the truth? Because make no mistake, there is always a price. The truth makes people uncomfortable. It exposes lies. It challenges power. It forces those who benefit from deception to reveal themselves. And they will fight back. But what is the alternative? To live in submission to falsehood? To pretend not to see what is happening around you? To let corruption grow unchecked because you fear the cost of resistance? That is not life. That is cowardice. Seneca wrote, "He who does not prevent a crime when he can encourages it." Silence is not neutral. It is a choice. It is a decision to let the lie win. And yet, many men tell themselves that silence is the safest path, that it is better to avoid conflict, to keep their heads down, to wait for someone else to speak up. But there is no safety in silence. There's only slow surrender. Picture this. You are in a room full of people, and someone speaks a lie about you, about someone else, about something that matters. You know it is false. You feel it in your gut, and yet you say nothing. The room nods in agreement. The lie becomes accepted as truth, and you walk away, knowing that you could have stopped it. Now imagine that happening again and again, until the world around you is built on falsehoods, and you are just another man who let it happen. Epictetus, who lived as a slave before becoming one of the greatest philosophers of his time, understood this well. He wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Speaking the truth often makes you an outcast. It makes people turn against you. But a man who values his principles over the approval of the crowd is a man who will never be owned. The truth is not always dramatic. It is not always about politics or power. Sometimes it is as simple as defending someone who has been wrongly accused, correcting a lie that spreads like wildfire, refusing to go along with a narrative that you know deep inside is false. It happens in families. A man watches as a relative is blamed for something they did not do, and he says nothing to keep the peace. It happens in workplaces. A man sees corruption, dishonesty, betrayal, and he tells himself it is not his business. It happens in relationships. A man senses that something is wrong, that he is being manipulated, that he is living under a falsehood, and yet he stays quiet because the truth is inconvenient. And then one day he realizes he has built his life on silence, that his refusal to speak has made him complicit in everything he once stood against. A man must have the courage to say no. That is not true. Even when his voice shakes, even when he stands alone, because there are worse things than being hated for speaking the truth. One of them is living in shame for never speaking at all. The test will come. Perhaps it has already come. A moment where you will see something false being accepted as truth, where you will feel the pull of silence, the temptation to let it go, to avoid the trouble that comes with honesty. And in that moment, you will have a choice. You can stay silent. You can watch as deception grows, as the world around you bends under the weight of lies. You can tell yourself it is not your fight, that it is easier to blend into the background. Or you can speak. You can say what needs to be said, knowing full well that it will cost you, that it may make you enemies, that it may change everything. Because a man who does not defend the truth will one day wake up and realize he no longer knows what truth is at all. Final thoughts. There comes a time in every man's life when he must choose between silence and speech, between surrender and defiance, between standing for what is right and allowing himself to be shaped by fear. These moments are not always grand, not always marked by flashing lights or dramatic battles. Often they are quiet, subtle. They happen in the spaces between conversations, in the seconds where hesitation creeps in the fleeting chance to speak up before the moment passes forever. But these moments define a man. They carve the edges of his soul. They shape who he becomes. Because in the end, a man is not remembered for the times he stayed silent to keep the peace. He is remembered for the times he stood his ground, when he spoke even when his voice trembled, when he refused to let the weight of the world crush his principles. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." And being a good man is not about words. It is about action. It is about knowing when silence is wisdom and when silence is weakness. It is about recognizing the moments that demand a voice, the moments where the cost of speaking is high, but the cost of staying silent is even higher. A man who allows his dreams to be crushed, who submits to control, who bows before lies, who lets injustice pass unchecked. He may live, but he does not live as a free man. He lives as a shadow of what he could have been. The path of resistance is not easy. It is not comfortable. It will earn you enemies. It will cost you friends. It will make you question yourself, wonder if the battle is worth it. But what is the alternative? To be silent? To let the world dictate who you are? To walk through life with your head bowed, never daring to claim what is yours? That is not life. That is slow death. So when the moment comes, and it will come, when you feel the pull of silence, when you hear the whisper of fear telling you to stay quiet, ask yourself this: what kind of man do I want to be? Do you want to be the man who let others define his fate, who accepted the chains placed upon him, who watched as the truth was buried and said nothing? Or do you want to be the man who spoke, who fought, who stood unshaken even when the world tried to break him? Because in the end, a man's voice is his power, and a man who knows when to use it is a man who will never be owned.